Course tours are presented at the Moodle Exchange Conference to share well-organized courses with interesting designs. In this tour, Elizabeth Wagner presents her English course for Communication for Science and Research, highlighting Perusall, Moodle Workshop, and a successful weekly course organization structure with the Moodle lesson activity.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Elizabeth. I teach in the English department. I primarily teach a course called English 333, which is Communication for Science and Research. So this is a course that the English department teaches for many of the science-related majors at the university. Some students who take the course are required to take it by their major course of study. Others are taking it as one of other options for an advanced writing class. So it's a course that is very project-based. It's writing intensive. So the students end up doing 5 major writing assignments throughout the course of the 16 weeks. So that's a lot of the focus of the teaching, is just what kind of document is this? Who is the audience for this kind of document? Why would professionals in the sciences need this document? What's the purpose of it? We talk a little bit about how communication is necessary for scientific development and discovery. And we try to just kind of contextualize the rhetorical situation of communication in some of these fields. But so much of what I'm teaching in the class is skills. How do we do this? How do we write a literature review? How do we find the sources for a literature review? How do we use citations properly? How do we take that literature review and turn it into a conference presentation? And how do we think about the design of that presentation? So those sorts of skills. And the students are mostly practicing those skills in the assignments of the course. So my Moodle course, and I can go ahead and share it with you. I've been teaching this course since 2016. And I teach multiple sections every semester, and I've taught this course asynchronously online. I've taught it in hybrid format. I've taught it fully in person. So I've had a lot of opportunity to sort of try different things and see what works and what doesn't work. And then, of course, as so many of these tours have talked about, the pandemic asked me to kind of reimagine what an asynchronous course is like. And one of the things that I felt during the pandemic and after the pandemic was this sense of sort of like the self-guidedness of an asynchronous course wasn't always serving the students very well. And I wanted to create a course that was a little bit more synchronous, even though it was asynchronous, and a little bit more guided. So a lot of the tools I use are tools that we've already seen talked about in these course tours today, but I'll show you how I use them. So this is my course, and one of the things that I want to show you is the week-by-week organization that I use. So at the top of the course, there's syllabus documents for the students. I've got some different communication options and some assignment information, which I'll show you in a minute. But one of the things that I do is have a weekly organization rather than a unit organization. So I think about how I would teach the course, or how I do teach the course, when it meets twice a week in the classroom. And I try to break the information down in the same way for the asynchronous students. So the first week is a little bit jumbled because there's some extra things for them to do that week. But every week I have sort of a schedule for them that they also get an announcement, and it's in the syllabus as well, but giving them those opportunities to find the same information in different places is what I do with the schedule. But each week I also move this week down. So that's one of the things that I think I like about the weekly organization, is once they've gone through everything that they need to do for that week, we start a new week. We move to week 2. And this kind of prevents the scroll of death that students are always telling us about. So every week, they don't have to go very far to get to what they have to do for that week. So in week 2, you can see all of the things that they'd be looking at for that week. They wouldn't have to, even if they're not listening to me, even if they're not reading the announcements, they can still come here and see these are the things that I have to do. So the other thing that I adopted to try to make the course more guided was weekly lesson, which I know you all have probably seen the lesson tool used before, but I had never used it when I first encountered it actually in a course that I was taking through the Office of Faculty Excellence. I encountered the lesson, and I realized that I had to be more engaged with that training when I was asked to use a lesson than if there was just a list of documents for me to click through. I spent more time actually reading the material because I had to read that material to go on to the next page. So it felt more guided to me as a student, so I wanted to try it for my students as well. I had always felt intimidated about lessons because if you have ever tried to, implement one in Moodle, there's so many ways that you can do it. It can be really complicated. My lessons are just very, very simple. They just move from one page to the next, and they incorporate text, they incorporate videos, I incorporate images. But one thing that I really like to do is incorporate essay questions, and the students know that they don't have to write an essay. But these questions are more reflection questions, trying to encourage some metacognitive thinking about what we're doing in the lesson. So for this one, so far in your academic career, what has your experience been with literature reviews? Have you ever read one? Have you ever written one? And this is a way for me to get to know the students because some of them have published literature reviews, but a lot of them have never heard of them. But I also find that many students, after learning from the earlier part of the module, they get to this question and they say, oh, I have read literature reviews. I just didn't know that I had read literature reviews. So there's a way that it helps them contextualize what they already know. It helps them feel, I think, a little bit more confident and helps them just think about, okay, why are we doing this? What are we doing here? So before the student can move on in the lesson, they have to write something to me. So I'm just going to click yes and kind of take you through the rest of this. So each lesson that I have has 4 questions and they are graded. So this provides accountability for them, but they can take them as many times as they want. So it's also not a difficult test. It's accountability for them. And I think I want to just pause and talk a little bit more about the reflection questions. Some of them I've adapted from Kimberly Tanner's work about metacognitive thinking and teaching. And you can see these questions are just they're really flexible and they offer a lot of different options. I really love using the lessons for these questions because I can respond individually to the students. So in an asynchronous class, a lot of times students aren't going to reach out to the faculty member, but I'm sort of not forcing them, but I'm basically requiring them to ask me questions and to talk to me. And then I'm also able to talk back to them. So sometimes it's just a really quick answer that I can send directly to them through the Moodle Lessons. Other times it's like a longer answer and we get more into the weeds about something. But they know that I'm reading what they're writing. They know that I'm paying attention to them. They know that I'm with them. I'm not just sort of an anonymous person behind the screen. So I think that really helps this interaction that the lessons can kind of allow me to create with the students. So that's one of the reasons why I love using the lessons. I do think it helps the students kind of gives them a little bit more guidance through the material, but then also allows me to use these sorts of questions with them. And it does provide a lot of accountability with the grading as well. So it's not a high stakes grade, but it is a grade that tells them, I care that you are paying attention to this material. So one of the drawbacks of using a graded Moodle lesson that I found is that when they reopen when the student completes the lesson and they've got their grade, if they go back to that lesson and reopen it, the grade will reset. That's been my experience. And I've never been able to work with anybody to figure out how to get around that. So my workaround has been creating a practice lesson. So essentially just copying the lesson, taking the questions out, making it ungraded. That's a setting you can check. And that way it's available to them. And they know that I expect them to go back to that material when they need it, because hopefully they're going to be looking at that when they're completing their assignment. So that's one thing that I do with the lessons. The other thing I do, just to give another option for the students, is where is it? I just put everything in a PDF. I keep clicking in the wrong place. I put everything in a PDF for them from all of the lessons about the particular assignment. So this is just another avenue for them to go back to the information. There's a table of contents that they can click, they can search. So gives them 2 different ways to return to the information. Hopefully signals to them that I'm expecting them to do that, because this is difficult work. They're going to have to return and revisit the examples and the instructions and things like that. So those are 2 ways that I've tried to make the course more guided and more interactive with me. And then I use 2 other tools to try to make the course more interactive in a student-to-student context. And one of the ways I do that is with Perusall, which I know we've already talked about Perusall a lot today. I'm not sure that I'm doing anything particularly exciting with it. I am working with students who don't do a lot of textual analysis. So it's something that I have to kind of repeatedly say, we're not looking at content here. We're trying to look at the rhetorical situation of this document and the textual features. How are they using citations? When are they using synthesis? What are the headings like? What does the references look like? So that's unfamiliar to the students in this course. And it can be helpful, I think, for them to just go through and be like, whoa, look at these numbered in-text citations. I've never seen that before. And to have someone else chime in, it's a place for them to ask questions. And notice things. I'm trying to get them just to slow down and notice things in the text. What do you see happening here? So it's a nice way as an alternative to a forum, basically, for them to talk to each other a little bit, for me to observe that conversation and chime in when it's appropriate. Yeah, and this is a tool that you can use documents, but you can also use videos. You can put a PowerPoint in here. You can put a podcast. Yes, do you have a question?
Are they doing this in a group in Perusall, or like who's making all those comments?
Those are students are making comments. I'm making some comments, but it's mostly the students. And I do put them into two separate groups. That's something that Perusall allows you to do because I have 23 students in each class. I don't know that there's that much to say that 23 people could make a bunch of comments, so we're separating them into separate groups so that there's a little bit more space for people to make comments. But that's something that's pretty easy to set up when you set up the assignment. So, and I know that many people use this for peer review and things like that. So you can make small, even smaller groups.
Yes.
Oh,
I was gonna say, I've never used it.
Yeah.
So several people have talked about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how exactly you set up. So it's pretty self-explanatory.
I think it takes, there's a little bit, it's not hard, but it takes a little bit of a learning curve. If you go to add an activity or resource, you can,
There it is.
where is it? There it is, yes. And then what it asks you to do basically, and you have to make sure, this really stumped me. You have to make sure that third-party cookies are allowed in your browser for Perusall. And then you can go to select content and it's going to take you to Perusall where you have to set up an assignment. So I think you maybe have to set up the assignment before you bring it into Moodle, but it's not hard to do that.
So then you're linking.
Yeah, you're just linking it. And there's lots of ways to, like you can have Perusall grade the comments for you or assess them or some way, or you can have them, and I don't do that, but you can have the data from Perusall imported into Moodle. I don't do that. I just there's a place where you can see who's commented, and I just look at that and then manually put it into the grade books. But yeah.
And I was just going to throw out, sorry, if you joined our Open Lab after this, or if you go on DELTA's website, we have lots of user guides and things for cleaning.
Yeah.
Or just email us at LearnTech and somebody will sit down with you about what you
Yeah.
And it also rolls over semester to semester nicely.
Yes, it does.
Oh, did the links stay when they?
You have to re-import it, but you can basically copy the assignment, so it's not hard.
Although
Yes.
one thing it does, this is a warning for you, if you change one of the files in your new version that you copied over, it'll change the file in the old one.
Oh, no.
Oh, really?
I didn't know
So
that.
it's better maybe to copy and rename it.
I don't know. I've never had that
I don't know if
happen.
it's
Or you don't
better.
care.
Maybe it's better to create it from scratch each
Yeah.
time. I'm not sure, but it's like old versions are like, these comments don't make sense anymore.
That sounds unfortunate. So the last thing I just wanted to show you is I also use the Moodle Workshop. And I think that is another tool that feels sometimes a little bit intimidating or overwhelming, that I think is just extremely helpful, and it can be used in a really simple way to just, your students upload a draft into the workshop and you create an assessment form for them to look at. So one of the things that I don't like about peer review and peer workshop is sometimes inline commenting. Students kind of fall back. If they don't have a lot of training in giving feedback, they fall back on talking about commas and talking about grammar in a way that's just, we're not interested in that in this class. We want to talk about more substantive, global kinds of things. So instead of using Google Docs where, although it can be very helpful sometimes where we have lots of inline commenting, I love the assessment form in the Moodle Workshop because it allows you to write questions that hopefully will reinforce the learning about the genre or the assignment and help students understand where you're focusing. And so that's where you also want them to focus when they're evaluating, or not really evaluating, but just giving feedback to their classmates. So that's something that I really like about the workshop. And then once you've set that form up and everybody's submitted their drafts, then you, as the instructor, move it to the next phase, and you can allocate the submission. So essentially it trades the papers for the students. So suddenly the students have other drafts that they can take a look at, and they're going to fill out this assessment form for their peers. And then once that's completed, then that assessment form goes back to the owner of the paper. So it's a pretty handy way to run peer workshop without having a lot of Google Docs or inline comments, things like that. So, and again, this can be really complicated. You can have Moodle assess the reviews and things like that. I prefer not to do that and just give credit myself for the participation. But yeah, I really like using it. And this is another tool that it's a work on the front end to set this up. But then every time you copy your course, most of the information from the workshop will go with it. So you don't have to set up the whole workshop every semester. So
you have to get the dates in there in the right place.
you do have to get the dates in the right place.
Dates,
yeah. And this is an assignment for which I feel like it helps to give wiggle room, because once the workshop closes and you exchange the papers, somebody can't jump in late to the workshop. So it's always good to give them a little bit of extra time, because, they're always going to be, it's good to have flexibility, right? And I don't want to exclude people from the workshop just because they're a couple hours late or something. So I always try to do that for the workshop. But that's really the majority of what I have for you. Anybody have questions or anything you want more explanation about?
I have a question. You have it organized by weeks, but you don't use week view in Moodle, because then it'll highlight the wrong week when you move to the bottom. So you use topics, but
I just
by weeks?
use topics and I change it the topic.
Okay, so you name the weeks.
And I think probably just because I've been working with this course in Moodle for so long, I've just always done it this way, and I actually didn't know about week view, or I just haven't thought about using it. But I do like being able to move the week to the bottom, and you have to teach the students about that. I mean, because they'll be like, where did it go? And then, once they figure it out, they're happy with that, but it's another thing to kind of teach. But do you use the week?
For one of my classes, I use the week view. Most I use the topic view.
Yeah.
The week view, then it kind of just highlights in red the current week, but you still have to scroll
Okay.
to the week that is the current week.
Yeah.
But now that you can collapse these, I think the scrolling isn't as bad.
Okay, that's good to know.
I don't know.
'Cause
but- and the nav, it lets them go right to it. And now that you can collapse all of those at once, which you didn't have at first, in the nav bar, you can, it's
Three
nice.
dots at the top.
Yeah, the three dots.
Oh,
at
the
the
three
top.
dots, you can collapse it all.
At first, yes, that was not there when you
Oh,
first
yeah.
opened that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, the thing about doing it this way is that you have to remember every Monday to change it.
Yes, that's right.
Sometimes
If you're-
that's hard to remember. So, any other questions?
Do you use the lesson tool in your in-person classes as well?
I do in hybrid, because then it becomes sort of like a flipped class where they're getting the lecture videos and everything through the lessons. But in-person classes, no, I haven't used it. I've just taught the material from the lessons in the classroom. So I'm sure there's lots of ways you could use it. So
How do you keep students, I've never really taught an asynchronous online course. If you just give them everything like that, do they try to jump ahead or something? Or are the deadlines such that you're keeping them, this is what you do this week? How do you keep them to the week?
that's a good question. I mean, there are always going to be students who want to work ahead and sometimes students ask me, is it okay to work ahead? And oftentimes I say, it's okay to work a little bit ahead, but the assignments are scaffolded, so I want to be able to give them feedback on the first piece of the assignment before they go on to the next piece of the assignment. So I don't do anything to restrict them moving on, but I do think, for the most part, if you are giving them feedback and they're waiting to hear from you about this piece before they move on to the next, I mean, I guess I try to set that expectation that I'm going to tell you, make sure your sources look great before you do this. So I haven't had a lot of trouble with that.
And also, is this for just NC State students that are in person here? They just have an option to do it like asynchronously or in person? Like, is this kind of like a student gets to choose how they take the course, but they're still like in-person students here at State?
They're in-person students here at State. It's a course that's just offered in different modalities, partly because the English department doesn't have a lot of classrooms, and so this is a service course for the English department, so we're one of the courses that kind of gets shifted to, or kind of moved into the online. Some English courses are really difficult to teach online, so yeah, these are in-person students who are just taking the course online. But they don't always have the option to take it different ways. It depends on how it's offered that semester. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I just don't know, like, I didn't know that our students here have these asynchronous classes they could take.
There are some.
So students on average will take one asynchronous online class a semester as an in-person student at UA. Because they're scheduled. It allows them, especially for electives, to fit in their schedules the way that they want to.
But that makes it difficult, I think, teaching asynchronous classes, because sometimes students, I think, expect the asynchronous class to be sort of the back burner course, you know? Mm-hmm. So you really have to make the argument for your course, like, no, this is just as important as a synchronous class. So I do have and maybe this addresses your previous question, I do have a twice weekly deadline. So I tell them from the beginning, I expect you to log in at least twice a week, and they have things due on Thursday and Sunday every week. So I think hopefully they get in the habit of, you can't forget about this class for 3 weeks. You have to. And for the first, I think, 8 weeks of the semester, if they don't participate on those days, I do reach out to them. Just, again, to make them recognize that, like, I'm here, this is a real class. Like, you're expected to be engaged. So I think that helps with the moving ahead.
Have you ever, we've restricted the topic to open on a certain day and to keep them from moving ahead.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. That's something that I've never really done.
If it's a biggest problem.
Yeah, it's just never been too much of a problem, but yeah, I could see that would be really helpful.
We told the students that we don't want to we want you to work in this course
yes.
weekly so that you don't need to go ahead and.
That's a great point, and especially with a writing class like this, I want them to focus on the writing process. A lot of them just see the end product and think, okay, I don't need any of this stuff, I just need to do the end piece. And it's like, no, you do need all these things because these things will help you with the end piece. So I think that's probably a really good idea to restrict. Any other questions? Wonderful, thank you so much for your attention.